Hi guys, welcome to Multiverse. Today we're going to take a look at the controller role. I've already made a video about the power over time, but I'll take a quick minute to explain it. Basically in the past, each controller power had two powers that would allow them to cast power over time. That's no longer the case. Now every single controller power, well every single powers you have, if you're in the controller role, will start the power over time. So let's show it. So as you can see in the top left corner, underneath the multiverse, my health bar, my power bar, you see the little green lightning bolt that says that the power over time is activated. It lasts for about 12 seconds. So basically every 12 seconds you need to activate a power to be able to reactivate the power over time. There seems to be some way to get some sort of double take like we did in the past. I didn't quite master that yet, so I will most likely make a follow-up video once I figure it out. Also, I will just go cover the basis of the controller role. So we'll probably make a video in the at some point with a more advanced version of the controller role. Otherwise, we'll end up spending 3 hours with this video. So I'll try to be a little brief, which is a bit challenging for me sometimes. So basically, the controller role does 3 things. The controller role gives power. The controller role applies debuffs to enemies. Basically, you apply malices that can lower their stats or certain abilities. And you can do some crowd control. Although, ironically enough, even though the role is called controller and you can do some crowd control, as a rule of thumb, you should leave the lion's share of the crowd controlling to the tank. The main reason for that is that the tank needs to be able to control the field, the battlefield. And if you throw in crowd control without letting the tank know, that might make the job of the tank a bit more difficult. So usually, as a rule of thumb, let the tank do most of the crowd control. But if some ads escape from the crowd control from the tank, or if there's other mobs that are not crowd controlled and that are about, let's say, to jump the healer or something, don't hesitate and crowd control those. But as a rule of thumb, let the tank manage most of the crowd control and just crowd control whatever the tank will fail to crowd control. I hope it makes some sort of sense. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask in the comment section down below. I'll see what I can do about answering your questions. So for crowd control abilities, there's quite a bunch of those, usually for each controller power. And sometimes they're not quite labeled as such. Like for example, we have our little power called Singularity here, and even though it doesn't really mention that it's a crowd control, I guess it's not really per se, but if you use it, as you can see, it does a pretty good job controlling the crowd. So I would suggest you experiment with the powers a bit to figure out which power seems to be doing a good job at doing crowd control. Controller Quantum has some pretty powerful crowd control abilities. Some missions in the past have been a lot easier with Quantum characters because usually you would be able to crowd control, even as a DPS. Often you would be able to crowd control a whole bunch of enemies, which somehow you weren't able to with the other powers. So when it comes to crowd control, Quantum is a really good choice. So let's take a quick look at the debuffs. Basically, there's 3 debuffs. There's defense debuffs, there's attack debuffs, and there's healing debuffs. And there's, as a rule, there's 2 such debuffs for each controller power. So in this case, we have a Singularity. Oh, come on. There we go. In this case, we have Singularity was reduce enemy defenses. And there's also, where's the other one? And there's also Time Shift, which reduces enemy defense. There's Alcubierre Wave. I'll say the A Wave because I keep on messing up that name. There's the A Wave that also reduces target's damage output. And there's another one, and there's also Warp Barrage that does the same thing. And there's also the healing debuffs. So there's a Gravity Bomb, which reduces the target's ability to heal. And there's Anomaly, which reduces target ability to heal. For the healing debuff, in my book, that is the less useful debuffs of them all. There's 2 reasons for that. The first reason is that not every enemy heals themselves. So there's only maybe a handful of enemies that really require the healing debuffs in the game. So unless you're fighting one of those handful of enemies, the healing debuff is usually pretty useless. So unless the healing debuff does something else, like in this case the debuff destabilizes enemies and makes them vulnerable to dilation effects. So if you need that, good. It creates an anomaly that traps your enemies. Again, it could be used as a crowd control, stunning, and also as a damage over time. And also it restores your supercharge. So that actually would makes it more useful than the actual healing ability. And if we look at the other healing debuffs, again it pretty much damages and crowd control your enemies a bit. And graviton charge enemies take additional damage. So, and it stuns also enemies, so it's a bit of a crowd control as well. So it does multiple things. So if those some of those multiple things are useful, then add the healing debuff to your loadout. But as a rule of thumb, the healing debuff itself, not very useful. Only against a handful of enemies. And the second reason why the healing debuff is not that useful is that even assuming that you're facing an enemy that actually heals himself. That was especially true in playing PvP. Like if you're fighting a player who can heal himself, and you apply the healing debuff to that player, if I remember correctly, the healing debuff is like 25%. If someone knows the actual percentage, correct me in the comment section down below. But for a long time it was 25%. I'm not sure if it's still the case now. I assume it is, but to be honest, I don't really know. But let's say you reduce the enemy healing abilities by 25%. Well, if the enemy is healing himself by, let's say, 1,000 health points, well, you reduce that by 25%, so he's only healing himself by 750 points. But if the enemy only needs 600 health points to heal himself, well, 750 points is more than enough for him to heal himself back to full health. So the 25% healing debuffs in that case will have been pretty pointless. And sadly, that there's quite a few occasions like that where even if the enemy heals himself, even if you cast the healing debuff on that enemy, basically all you did was waste power because the enemy still heals himself back to full health. So basically through trial and errors and through experience, basically, you will figure out which enemies is worth using the healing debuffs on, and which enemies where it's not really so helpful. Although as a rule of thumb, in a group, players, if an enemy heals, players will expect you to cast a healing debuff, even if in some cases not really useful. So sometimes you have to play anticipating the expectation of other players. It's sad, but that's how it is. Unless you don't mind being kicked if you don't play the way other players want you to play. As a rule of thumb, I say play the way you want, and if it doesn't work, just leave. But if you don't want to get kicked, or if you don't want to leave, sometimes you're going to have to adjust your playstyle according to what people expect you to do as a controller. I will show you a quick example of how the debuffs actually work. So the singularity will be the defense debuff. So once I cast it, you will see a red shield. If you look to the top of the screen, you see a red shield appear underneath the sparring target. That red shield means that the defense of that target is lowered. Sadly, even though you could swear that the ability affected both target, it isn't so. It's only the target that is actually targeted that receives the debuff. As you can see, the other target, no debuff on that target. So if you want to put the debuff on a target, you literally need to target that target and give it to the debuff. As a rule of thumb, I wouldn't waste debuffs on mobs unless you have unless you have DPSs who do very little damage. It's pretty much pointless to cast debuffs on mobs. At first, you only debuff one enemy at a time. So if there's like half a dozen mobs, there's no way you're going to be able to debuff half a dozen of them. So at best, you will debuff 1, 2, maybe 3 before they're all dead. So as a rule of thumb, I wouldn't worry too much about casting debuffs on mobs. I would save my debuffs for bosses. And now let's try our other debuff. So again, you can see underneath the sparring target, this little red target. That's the attack debuff. So basically, once you see that on a target, the target will do less damage thanks to that. Sometimes during a fight, you'll see enemies will have like a red skull next to their name. Like the red skull will appear while they fight next to their name. Basically, that means that they're prepping a pretty massive attack. So often that's a perfect time to apply the attack debuff. As a rule of thumb, if you can keep the attack debuff constantly on the enemy, that's even better. But if somehow you cannot cast the attack debuff as much as you like, at least cast it when you see that skull thingy next to the enemy. That means the enemy is preparing a pretty big attack, and sometimes that pretty big attack, if you can debuff it just a bit, reduce the damage just a bit, it may mean the difference between some players being one shot or some players surviving a one-shot attack. And let's switch armories because we can. And as a rule of thumb, usually I'll have an armory with an attack debuff and a defense debuff. But I also have what I call my Debuff Armory. Well, I'll add the healing debuff to the lot. And if you look, you can see underneath the sparring target, you see that little red heart. That's the healing debuff. So when you see the little red heart, it tells you that the healing debuff is on that character. And of course, you can have... Oh. Sorry about that. You can have all debuffs on a single character. So as you can see, we have the red heart, we have the red shield, and we have the red target underneath the same character. So if you have enough power to be able to do so, you could completely debuff an enemy if you wanted to. But that's basically here I'm just doing that in out of context, because usually, as a rule of thumb, when you're in an actual mission, you'll have some players who will be a bit power hungry, so you will need to cast the power dump or the group power heal. So the group power heal on top of all the debuffs, it may be too much for what you can do. So odds are you'll probably burn through your power bar if you try to cast all your debuff during the fight. So sometimes you're going to have to be selective. In certain fights, you will have to focus on giving out power because the group will be power hungry. In other fights, when the group is not so hungry, then you will be able to apply your debuffs. And depending on the circumstances, there's some debuffs, like the healing debuffs. In most cases, you're not going to use it. You're going to use either the defense debuff or the attack debuff. The defense debuff, if you can keep it through the whole fight, that's fine. And for the attack debuff, if you cannot have it through the whole fight, at least try to cast it when you see the red skull appear next to the enemy name, telling you that they're prepping themselves for a pretty big attack. So let's switch back again. And let's take a quick look at our skill points. In the past, there was some iconic powers that would give vitalization and dominance that you could take for your character if you wanted to. That's pretty much gone now. And also in the past, you had to, if you wanted extra stats, you pretty much had to put points into weapons you weren't using. That's pretty much gone. Nowadays, if you want to put points only in one weapon, that seems to be an option. So let's take a quick look at the stats. There's what is called focuses, and there's 3 focuses to choose from. There's the weapon expert focus. That's if you want if you think you're going to use mostly your weapons, you take that focus. There's the hybrid focus if you think you're going to use both your power and weapon. And there's the superpowered focus. If you think you're going to use mostly your superpower, you should put your points in there. What I like about the superpower focused mostly, it's not the 10% might, it's not the 10% power. It's the 25% power regeneration. That seems to be a pretty good deal, especially if you use a lot of powers. So, and in the case of a controller, I'm a bit of a power spammer, so I'll use my powers quite a lot. So as a controller, as a rule of thumb, you're going to want to use you're going to want to purchase all the critical power chances. If you take them all, it gives you 20% critical power chance. Actually, I have a bit more than that, probably because of other abilities. But with your skill points, you can at least get 20% critical chance. That means that I'll try to show it a bit. Normally, I should be able to. Once in a while, I should give. Oh, there we go. You saw the red, the orange exploding speech balloon, sort of. That means that I just did a power critical. Usually, it means that you give out a bit of extra power for reasons. Normally, my character should have, I think, yes, like 25%. My character has 25% critical power chance, which means roughly one time out of four, it should be a power critical. Sadly, sometimes you'll go very, very long time through a dry spell where you will not do any criticals at all. That's sadly the random number generator for you in this universe online. Even though technically you're supposed to have one chance out of 5, and one chance out of 4, you can go 10, 12, 20 takes without a single critical, and then you'll get like 2 or 3 in a row, and then you'll go through another dry spell of 10, 20 takes without getting any critical. I'm not sure how exactly they calculate their percentages. There might be some invisible variable that we're not seeing. That means that even if you have 25% critical chance, you're not really going to do it one time out of 4. But I don't really know that. And there's the critical power magnitude. Basically, once you actually do a critical power, you're going to do a bit 20% extra. You're going to give 20% extra power thanks to your critical power magnitude. Again, I have no idea to verify how it actually works, because sometimes you'll do I'll say that after in a bit. And also you can put skill points in vitalization. I'm not sure why it's not a percentage or a flat rate. It seems to be both. So you seems to, as you put points and points into vitalization, you seems to get at some point, like I have 161 skill points right now. The maximum is 175. Once you reach the maximum, you cannot put any more. And at 161, I get 10% vitalization and 462 extra vitalization. I'm not sure why it's not just a percentage or just a flat fee, a flat number, but somehow we get both. So if I was to reset my skill points, I wouldn't lose only 462. I would lose actually about 1,000 vitalization because of the combination with the two. Again, not sure why it's not only a percentage or only a flat number. Somehow they felt that they had to give us both. Not sure why, but there has to be a reason. As a controller, you may be tempted also to put points in dominance. Dominance helps with your shields as a controller, and that's pretty much it. So, as a rule of thumb, I'll look at the dominance I have. Like right now, I have 4,520, and I'll look at how much dominance do I need to gain access to the top mission in the game. So the top missions in the game requires 3,911. So I have more than enough to be able to access any content in the game. So usually I'm happy with that. I could decide once I finally have all my points in vitalization, I could decide to start putting points in dominance. But also I could decide to put points in health or put points in attack or damage. I guess it doesn't really matter after that. So let's get back to the critical power magnitude. So basically, if I look at my stats, it says that I should be doing 45. I should have like 45% extra on critical power magnitude, meaning that whenever I do a critical power chance, whenever I give out power and I do a critical, technically I should have 45% extra power. And I think we pretty much covered all we really needed to cover for the controller role. As you can see, there's a lot to cover. I tried to make it quick and I failed miserably. So ideally, as a controller, you want to get as much vitalization as you can. There are people who suggest actually getting as much power as you can. I'm not sure about that. Usually I have more than enough power to cast any powers I need. So with vitalization, my power over time and my group power heal gives out a bit extra power. I could probably get, one of the things though is that I still have quite a few beta mods. I would probably I would give out a lot more power if I had only like type 8 mods or something. Sadly, there's been a lot of crafting to do ever since we had Time Capsule. There's quite a lot of crafting, and basically there's more crafting in the game than I have material for. So at some point I stopped crafting mods for two reasons. One is that very often you end up changing your gear quite a lot and very quickly. So sometimes you would put a mod in a piece of gear, and 5 minutes later, oops, you got a new piece of gear that's better, and you have to switch your mod or to craft a new mod. And so usually, basically, as a rule of thumb, I would actually wait until I got the vendor gear. But then again, you get stuck into, do you put your mod in the vendor gear, or do you put your mod in the vendor elite gear? So, and basically I ended up waiting and waiting and waiting, and never got around to actually putting good mods in my gear. So I pretty much went back to using better mods, which does the trick so far. But if I had actually better mods, I would have more than 6,000 vitalization. I'm gonna have to do the math and try it out at some point. And also there's mods you can have in your generators. Like basically for my generators, right now I crafted the top mods I could, which gives you 70 vitalization. Again, it's not that much, so it's a 280 total, but it's better than nothing, I suppose. And I guess I could craft some better some better power mods, and some better might mods. Yeah, we'll see. So now I've started rambling, so let's go back. Again, as a rule of thumb, controllers do three things: give out power, debuff enemies, and crowd control. And also, if you really want to, you can also shield your group, protect your group members. Because one of the supercharge that I like to use is Event Horizon. It's a shield, and it protects me and 7 other teammates from damage and restore power over time. Basically, I don't have. Basically, what it does, it pretty much casts a shield like this one around everyone in the group. It gives power to everyone in the group, and it protects everyone in the group. So it's a pretty good supercharge to have. So that's pretty much it for now, guys. So as always, thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.